This is Chapter 2, Learning Objective 5. We're looking at salaried employees that have a fluctuating work week. So, employer and employee may forge an agreement that a fluctuating schedule on a fixed salary is acceptable. So, overtime would be calculated by dividing normal salary by the total hours worked. Then an extra 0.5 overtime premium is paid for all the hours worked over 40. Or you can divide the fixed salary by 40 hours, which will give a different pay rate each week, and then add an extra 0.5 overtime premium for all hours worked over 40. There's an alternative plan to this, and this is appropriate for really irregular work schedules, and this is more restrictive than the regular fluctuating work week method, and the conditions that have to be met in order to use this below plan are outlined in your text. But it works if the schedule is really irregular. Deductions can't be made for non-disciplinary absences, and guaranteed compensation can't be for more than 60 hours. And you would calculate this salary as the wage rate multiplied by the maximum number of hours, and then add 50% for overtime. And there is an example of with numbers of how to calculate that in the book. Piece rate is a different way to calculate, and the FLSA requires that piecework earners get paid for non-productive time, and it has to equal what the piece rate has to equal the minimum wage with overtime calculated in one of two ways. There's method A, which is you take the units produced times the unit piece rate, and that's the regular earnings. And then you take the regular earnings and divide it by the total hours that it took to make those pieces, and that's your hourly rate. Then you take the hourly rate times 0.5 or 1/2, and you get your overtime premium. So your regular, what you would get paid for would be your regular earnings plus the overtime premium times the overtime hours. Or, method B says, take the units that you could produce in 40 hours, times it by the piece rate, and add the units produced in overtime, and times that by 1.5 times the piece rate. And these methods will give you two different results. So let's look at two examples. So in this first one, you're going to calculate the gross pay using both methods. So they made 4,812 units inspected. Actually, they didn't make them; they were inspecting. So this is somebody who's getting paid per unit inspected in a 47.25 hour week. 600 of those units were produced in the extra hours, and the employee is paid 12 cents per unit. So method A says, all right, this is the units times 12 cents. That's the regular piece rate. Divide that by the hours that it took, and that converts the piece rate to an hourly rate. Then times that by 0.5, and that's the overtime premium. So the total pay is the regular piece rate earning plus $6.11 times the overtime hours, anything over 40 hours a week. So you get a gross of $621.74. Method B says, take the units that were produced during the regular time, so that's your 4812 minus the 600 that was in overtime, times that by your regular piece rate, and then times the 600 times 12 times, that's the piece rate, times 1.5, which is basically adding an extra half to your rate. That's the overtime premium. So if you were an employer, you would prefer to use method B. If you're an employee, you would prefer method A, because that's where you're going to get the most. Here's another example. Inspection rate is 8 cents a unit. An inspector inspected 6897 units in 43.5 hours, and 123 of these were in overtime. So let's calculate both methods. Method A, 6897 times 8 is 551.76. You're going to convert that to an hourly rate by dividing it by the hours that it took her to make that many units. So that's, or inspect that many units. That's 12.68 divided by 0.5, or times it by 0.5. 6.34 is your overtime premium. So you would say, all right, they get the regular piece rate, and then the premium. This is hourly. So in the first method, you figure the overtime premium as an hourly rate. So she worked 3.5 hours extra, so that's her gross, $573.95. This one, your overtime premium is based more on the piece rate. So you figure your total units that were produced during the 40 hours. So you would take your 68.97 minus 423, and you get 64.74 times the rate, and then the extra 423 are at the piece rate times 1.5. So again, this is less, method B. So method A, converting it to hourly, is more preferred than taking the overtime rate as a part of the piece rate. There are some special incentive plans that are basically modifications of piece rate plans that are used to entice workers to produce more. And the computation of the payroll is based on differing rates for differing quantities of production. So an example of an incentive plan might be 18 cents a unit for units inspected up to 2,000 units a week, 24 cents if you get between 2,000 and 3,500 a week, and 36 cents for units inspected over 3,500 units a week. Now there's also commissions, which can be used in many combinations, and it's basically a stated percentage of revenue paid for each transaction. You can have commissions with a base salary, or they can just stand alone. You've heard of people working on straight commission versus some that have a base salary and then they get commission on top of that. And this is fine as long as minimum wage provisions are met. But the exceptions would be outside salespeople who are exempt from FLSA. If you go back to those requirements, outside salespeople might be 100% commission, and they might not make minimum wage. But they don't need to because they're exempt from the FLSA. Example, Sam sold $40,000 of his product. His quota is $31,500. He gets 2% of everything that he sells in excess of his quota, and his annual base salary is $30,000. He gets paid bi-weekly, so what would be his total gross? Well, take his $30,000, divide it by 26 weeks. That's his base salary. Then take the $40,000 minus the $31,000, because that's the excess of his quota, and times it by the 2%, so he gets 170 commission plus his base salary. So 1323.85. You can also have non-discretionary bonuses, which are bonuses that are part of the employee's wage rates, and they have to be included for the period that's covered by the bonus. So these are known in advance, or they're set up as incentives that have to be added to the wages for a week. So the way you do this is you get these bonus, divide it by the total hours worked, so you can get your regular pay, and then overtime's based on that rate. So example, Jamil earns $13.50 an hour, and he also earned a safety performance bonus of $85 because he didn't hurt himself on the job. And he worked 44 hours this week. So the question is, what's he going to get paid? Because he has some overtime coming. So $13.50 times 44 is $594, plus his performance bonus is $85. So that's the total regular rate that he would get paid. Divide that by the 44 hours, and that's his regular rate, $15.43. Times that by 0.5, and you get your overtime bonus. Overtime rate is $7.72. That's the premium. Times 4 hours that he worked overtime, because he worked 44 hours. So $30.88. So he gets his regular plus his overtime bonus of $30.88, which is $709.88. Profit sharing plans are ones in which an employee shares in the corporate profits, like a percentage. And you can get your share, or the employee gets their share either in the form of cash, or profits paid into a retirement account, or profits distributed as stock. And there are certain standards that are established by the Department of Labor that these payments have to meet.